I've always been fascinated by urban exploration, the thrill of uncovering places long forgotten and left to the mercy of time. So, when I heard the rumor about the abandoned mall on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to see it for myself. They said it was built in the early 80s, but was shut down within a decade due to a series of disturbing events that culminated in a mysterious fire. Now it stood as a decaying monument to a past no one wanted to remember. On a dreary autumn evening with the sky a melancholy shade of gray, I decided it was the perfect time to venture into this forsaken place. The mall's imposing structure loomed ahead, partially hidden behind tangled vines and encroaching foliage. As I approached, the wind whispered through the skeletal remains of trees, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. I found an entrance that had been forced open by previous explorers. As I stepped inside, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of mildew. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling and the distant drip of water. My flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The layout of the mall was familiar but unsettling. Echoes of happier times lingered in the peeling paint and crumbling storefronts. The once bustling food court now housed nothing but overturned chairs and shattered glass. I moved slowly, each step echoing through the empty space, heightening my sense of isolation. It wasn't long before I began to feel a creeping unease. It started as a slight chill, a prickle at the back of my neck. The air seemed to grow colder, more oppressive. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment I was plunged into darkness. When the light stabilized, I saw something that made my heart race, a set of footprints, unmistakably fresh, leading deeper into the mall. My rational mind told me it was probably another explorer, but a deeper, primal part of me felt a growing sense of dread. I followed the footprints, my steps now tentative and cautious. As I ventured further, the surroundings grew more dilapidated. The floor was littered with debris, and strange stains marred the walls, rust-colored streaks that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The footprints led me to an old department store, its once grand entrance now sagging and decrepit. Inside, the air was even colder, and an eerie silence enveloped me. I could almost hear my heartbeat in the oppressive quiet. Shelves stood like sentinels, their contents long since looted or decayed. I navigated the labyrinthine aisles, my unease growing with every step. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible yet distinctly human. I froze, straining to catch the sound again. It was like a sigh coming from somewhere in the shadows. My flashlight flickered again, and this time I could have sworn I saw a figure darting just at the edge of the light. My pulse quickened, but I pressed on, curiosity mingling with fear. As I moved deeper into the store, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a cacophony of disembodied voices that sent shivers down my spine. I felt like I was being watched, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Panic started to gnaw at the edges of my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm and focused. I reached what appeared to be the store's back room, its door ajar. The whispers were now a low, almost pleading murmur. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, cramped, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. In the center of the room was an old, tattered mannequin, its blank eyes staring vacantly into the darkness. But it wasn't the mannequin that held my attention. It was the writing on the walls. Scrawled in what looked like a dark, rusty substance were words and symbols, their meaning obscure and unsettling. Some of the phrases were in languages I didn't recognize, while others were disturbingly clear. "Help me. They're here, and no escape." My flashlight flickered once more, and for a split second, the room seemed to warp and shift. I felt a sudden, intense pressure in my chest, as if the very air had turned against me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling my head with a disorienting cacophony. I stumbled back, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the small room. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, desperately trying to open it. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and I felt a cold, unseen presence closing in on me. My flashlight flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging me into utter darkness. In that moment, I felt a pair of cold, clammy hands grip my shoulders. I screamed, thrashing wildly in the darkness, but the hands held me firm. The whispers were deafening now, a relentless tide of voices that threatened to drown me in terror. I could feel the cold breath of something inhuman on my neck, its presence suffocating and relentless. Just as I felt I couldn't take it any longer, the pressure suddenly released. The whispers stopped, and the darkness seemed to lift ever so slightly. My flashlight flickered back to life, casting a weak, flickering glow around the room. The door was now open, and the oppressive feeling had lessened, though it still lingered in the air. I stumbled out of the room, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I didn't look back as I made my way through the store, back into the main part of the mall. The footprints were gone, as if they had never been there. The eerie silence had returned, but now it felt more like a watchful presence than before. As I finally exited the mall, the cold night air hit me like a wave, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The mall stood behind me, a dark, looming shadow against the night sky. I knew I would never return to that place, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out. To this day, I can't fully explain what happened in that abandoned mall. Whether it was the lingering presence of some malevolent force, or just my mind playing tricks on me, I'll never know. But one thing is certain. The memories of that night haunt me still, and I can't escape the feeling that the mall's dark secrets are far from forgotten. They say that certain places hold memories, that the walls and floors can absorb the essence of past events, trapping them like insects in amber. I didn't believe it, until I set foot in the old Silver Springs Mall. Abandoned for over 2 decades, this mall had a reputation among locals for being haunted, not by ghosts, but by the unsettling echoes of the lives that once filled its corridors. It was late November, the air crisp with the promise of winter. A light fog settled over the ground as I approached the mall. The once vibrant exterior was now a decaying facade, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. As I walked through the main entrance, the heavy metal doors creaked ominously, and I felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold. Inside, the mall was a graveyard of consumerism. The air was thick with dust, and the stench of mold and decay was almost overpowering. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of desolation. The tiled floor was cracked and littered with debris, while the storefronts, once brimming with life, now stood as empty, gaping voids. I wandered through the empty halls, the sound of my footsteps echoing unnaturally. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof. As I passed by a long-defunct electronics store, I thought I heard a faint hum, like the ghost of a power source long since cut off. I paused, straining to hear it again, but the sound was gone. My destination was the old cinema at the far end of the mall. It was said to be the epicenter of the unsettling events that plagued the place before its closure. People spoke of strange occurrences during movie screenings, projectors that turned on by themselves, seats that moved as if occupied by invisible guests, and chilling, disembodied whispers that sent shivers down the spine. As I approached the cinema, the temperature seemed to drop noticeably. My breath fogged the air, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. The entrance to the cinema was partially boarded up, but I managed to squeeze through a gap. Inside, the darkness was almost tangible, as if it sought to swallow the light from my flashlight. The lobby was a ghostly shadow of its former self. The concession stand was covered in a thick layer of dust, its glass display cases shattered. Movie posters, their colors faded and edges frayed, hung limply on the walls. I made my way to the theater itself, the doors heavy and unyielding. With a bit of effort, I managed to push them open, and the sight that greeted me was both eerie and mesmerizing. Rows upon rows of seats stretched out before me, their upholstery torn and moldy. The screen at the front was a blank gray canvas, but the projector stood like a sentinel at the back of the room. As I stepped inside, I heard a faint rustling, as if something unseen moved through the theater. My pulse quickened, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth of this place. I made my way to the front row, the floor sticky with long-dried soda, and who knows what else. As I sat down, the seat creaked beneath me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I turned my flashlight toward the projector, half expecting it to spring to life, but it remained dark and silent. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from all around me, filling the air with a chilling presence. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakably mournful. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I scanned the theater, my flashlight flickering, but saw nothing. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I knew I had to leave. As I stood up, the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of desperate voices. I stumbled toward the exit, my flashlight flickering wildly. Just as I reached the door, I felt a cold hand grasp my wrist. I screamed, wrenching my arm free and bursting out of the theater. I ran through the mall, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. The whispers followed me, a relentless tide of fear and despair. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air a welcome relief. I glanced back at the mall, its dark silhouette looming against the foggy sky. I never returned to the Silver Springs Mall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The whispers, the cold touch, the overwhelming sense of dread. I'll never forget the shadows of the forgotten. As I stood in the fog, trying to catch my breath, I heard it again. The whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I turned my flashlight back toward the mall, scanning the broken windows and decaying facade. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I knew I had to leave, but a part of me was drawn to the mall, compelled to uncover its secrets. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the memories of that night. The whispers echoed in my mind, and I felt a constant sense of unease. It was as if the mall had left an indelible mark on me, a haunting reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. I tried to go about my daily life, but the pull of the mall was irresistible. A week later, I found myself standing at the entrance of the Silver Springs Mall once again. This time, I came prepared. I brought a camera, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural, and a friend who shared my interest in the paranormal. We both felt the weight of the atmosphere as we stepped inside, the familiar chill settling over us. We made our way through the mall, the eerie silence amplifying our footsteps. My friend, Sarah, was just as unnerved as I was. We explored the old stores, each one filled with the remnants of a forgotten past. The whispers started again, faint and distant at first, but growing louder as we approached the cinema. The doors to the theater were still heavy and unyielding, but with Sarah's help, we managed to push them open. The sight that greeted us was just as eerie as before. The rows of seats, the blank screen, the silent projector. Everything seemed frozen in time. We set up our equipment, hoping to capture any signs of paranormal activity. As we sat in the front row, the whispers grew louder, filling the theater with an oppressive presence. Sarah turned to me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were almost deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from all directions. I felt the same cold touch on my wrist, and I knew we had to leave. We grabbed our equipment and ran, the whispers following us out of the theater and through the mall. Once outside, we didn't stop running until we reached the car. We sat there for a moment, trying to catch our breath and process what had just happened. Sarah turned to me, her face still pale. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. "But I don't think we're supposed to find out." We never returned to the Silver Springs Mall after that night, but the experience left a lasting impact on both of us. The whispers, the cold touch, the overwhelming sense of dread. They haunted our dreams, a constant reminder of the horrors we had witnessed. To this day, I can't fully explain what happened in that mall, but I know one thing for sure: some places are better left forgotten. The first thing that struck me was the smell. Not just dust and mildew, but something faintly acrid, like old smoke and something else, something damp and rotting. I tried to ignore it as I walked deeper, my footsteps swallowed by the oppressive hush. Then came the first sound, a whisper, faint, indistinct, like breath against my ear. I spun around, shining my light in every direction, but there was nothing, just empty corridors stretching into shadow. I swallowed hard, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The mind plays tricks in places like this. I pushed on, making my way toward the food court. The vast open space was eerie in its abandonment. Overturned chairs and broken tables littered the area, the remnants of forgotten meals still visible in the form of faded ketchup packets and crumpled napkins. The once vibrant neon signs of fast food joints were now dead, their menus hanging in tatters. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Footprints, fresh in the dust, leading away from where I stood. I wasn't alone. A surge of panic shot through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe another explorer had been here recently. Maybe they were still here. I considered turning back, but a twisted sense of curiosity, maybe even arrogance, pushed me forward. I followed the footprints, my heartbeat hammering with each step. They led down a side corridor toward what used to be a department store. The scent of decay grew stronger. The darkness felt heavier. My flashlight flickered for a second, and in that moment I heard another whisper, clearer this time. A single word: run. A chill ran down my spine. My mouth felt dry. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave, but I had already come this far. Swallowing my fear, I stepped into the department store. The vast interior was filled with scattered mannequins, their plastic faces frozen in eerie smiles, arms outstretched as if reaching for something unseen. Some had been knocked over, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Others still stood, staring into the void with sightless eyes. The footprints led deeper inside, weaving through the labyrinth of displays. Then I saw it. A figure. It stood at the far end of the store, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. I could make out the outline of a person, motionless, watching. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. No response. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam wavered, illuminating more of the figure. It was wrong. Its arms were too long, its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its face, if it had one, was obscured by shadow. The longer I stared, the less human it seemed. The proportions were distorted, stretched. Then, in a single unnatural motion, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. My body locked up. Every muscle screamed at me to get out, but I was rooted in place, suffocated by terror. I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Layers of hushed tones overlapping, growing in intensity, like dozens of unseen mouths murmuring secrets meant to be forgotten. I turned and ran. The whispers followed. The shadows felt alive, closing in around me. As I sprinted through the mall, the corridors seemed to stretch, twist, change. Stores that had been familiar moments ago were suddenly foreign, their signs in languages I didn't recognize. The very air felt thicker, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. Then I reached the entrance, only to find it wasn't there. The gap I had crawled through was gone. The glass doors were whole, intact as if they had never been broken. My reflection stared back at me in the dusty glass, wide-eyed and panting. And behind me, just over my shoulder, something moved. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. A shadow slithered through the reflection, shifting, watching. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening cacophony, a suffocating storm of sound. My vision blurred, my pulse a frantic drum in my ears. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. I was outside. The cold air hit me like a slap, the mist curling around my shaking form. I turned back. The mall stood as it had before, silent, abandoned, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had changed. Something had seen me. I don't remember the drive home. The memories of that night blur at the edges, like a dream half forgotten upon waking. But one thing remains crystal clear. I wasn't alone in Hollow Mall. I have always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something about the silence, the frozen-in-time decay, that both unnerves and fascinates me. I tell myself it's the history that lingers, the stories trapped within the peeling walls and shattered windows. Maybe that's why, when I heard about Hollow Mall, I couldn't resist the urge to see it for myself. Hollow Mall had been closed for nearly 20 years. Once a thriving shopping center, it had become the site of strange occurrences and disappearances, earning it a grim reputation. The official story was that a fire had destroyed part of the structure, making it unsafe. But locals whispered other reasons, tales of eerie figures spotted in the shadows, of employees who would vanish without a trace, of stores that seemed to rearrange themselves overnight. I arrived on a cold November night, the air thick with mist, making the hulking skeleton of the mall even more foreboding. Its shattered skylights yawned like broken teeth, and ivy crawled up the walls, trying in vain to reclaim the structure. A rusted, "Closed" sign hung loosely on the main entrance doors, swinging slightly in the wind, as if warning me to turn back. But I didn't. I slipped inside through a gap where glass doors had once stood, stepping into absolute stillness. My breath felt too loud in the void-like quiet. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam cut through the dust-heavy air, illuminating remnants of a forgotten past. Old store signs hung askew, their neon tubing shattered. Mall directories stood like tombstones, their maps faded and unreadable. The tiled floor was cracked and strewn with debris, papers, broken glass, a child's abandoned shoe, its laces curled like dead fingers. And sometimes, late at night, when I stand in front of a mirror, I swear I see something move in the reflection. Watching. Waiting.